everyone, Greg Wade here. We're here today to talk about how to take care of your sourdough starter, how to make sure it's lively, active, and ready to use for all of your naturally leavened products, do's, don'ts, general starter maintenance, and you can look back at this recipe and video when you're referencing anything that you're making using sourdough starter. So things that you need to know when you're taking care of a sourdough starter is, one, what it looks like when it is over-fermented, when you need to feed it, and then two, when it is active and lively and ready to use for bread. So I've got two ready right here. This one here is the one that is over-fermented, and you can see as you tilt the bowl, it's very runny, it's very liquid, and there are very, very small bubbles on the surface of it. It looks very flat and a kind of matte, right? It doesn't really reflect much light. And when you scoop into it, it's really pretty runny. Okay, so this one here needs to be fed. It doesn't really have any structure, but it does still have all of the yeast and the bacteria in it. It's just waiting for food. The reason you don't want to use this starter for leavening bread right away is because the longer the sourdough ferments, the more acid you're going to build up. And if you add too much acid into your dough, what's going to happen is it deteriorates the quality of your dough in general. Okay, so let's talk about what a lively sourdough starter looks like. So that's in this bowl here, and you can see that it is, this is the same amount of batter, and it's got more volume to it, which is really, really important. That's one indicator of your sourdough strength. And then you can see larger bubbles on top, and it's kind of smooth and rounded, which means that it is still rising, which is also important. And it's also kind of glossy. So all of these things are really strong indicators of a healthy sourdough starter. And when I pull at it, you can see that it's actually a bit got structure to it, right? It's not just running off of my fingers. So all of these things mean that it is not over-fermented. And this starter is ready to use. So how do we get from our old starter to our usable starter is we feed it. So when you're feeding a sourdough starter, you never use the last of it when you're putting it into your bread or your baked products, okay? So we're always going to feed the sourdough starter more than what you're going to be using in the recipe, so you can still have some left over for your next batch of bread, okay? So to feed it, what we're going to do, warm water, your over-fermented sourdough starter, and then flour. And this is equal parts, so this is 100 grams of each. 100 grams of starter, 100 grams of warm water, 100 grams of flour, and I just mix it in the bowl like this until all of the flour is absorbed. And then you'll let this ferment for about 4 hours at room temperature, and that will give you our nice, active, lively sourdough starter that you want to use in your bread. All right, let's talk about some do's and don'ts of starter maintenance. We get tons of comments all the time. I think I killed my sourdough starter. What do I do? Truth of the matter is that these things are much more resilient than you think. So first thing to do is when you think that you have killed your sourdough starter, what you're going to want to do is refresh it a bunch of times throughout the next few days. Okay, so that can be once in the morning, once at night, and you just keep the thing at room temperature the whole time. Okay, so and then you would take out most of it, feed what is left So you take out your 100 grams, feed it 100 grams of flour and water, let that ferment until nighttime. You then repeat that process until you see that it's getting really nice and active and bubbly and lively, and then you've recovered your sourdough starter. So really, if you think you've killed it, don't throw it away. At least try to save it. You've probably let it go a little bit too far, but it's probably not actually dead. Okay? Now, at the bakery, what we do is we feed our starter 3 times a day. That's kind of a lot to ask of somebody that likes to bake on weekends or at home. So what do? It is completely acceptable to get your starter to a point that it is active and lively like this, and then put it into the fridge. And then you can, depending on your interest and skill level and time, you can take it out, you can feed it once a day, you can feed it once a week. But you should be feeding it at least once a week. Okay, so what you would do is pull it out of the fridge, take out your 100 grams, discard the rest, feed that 100 grams your flour and water, let it get active and lively, put it back in the fridge. Okay, and then that'll keep it alive, that'll keep it nice and happy for your next batch of bread. But you'll want to pull it out, feed it before you put that in your next batch of bread. So you always want to be feeding it prior to putting it in your dough. But weekly maintenance is totally acceptable. Okay, so when is the absolute best time to use your sourdough starter? Well, this is going to take a little bit of work on your part. You need to watch it. Intensely is probably appropriate. And what you're going to do after you feed it, every half hour, 45 minutes, take a look at the sourdough starter, and you should see that it is rising. And at a certain point, what you're going to see is that it's going to lose this crested dome around the edges. So remember that dome around the edge means that it is currently still actively rising. And what you'll see is a crease start to form right down the center, or maybe just slightly off center in the middle of the paste. And then you'll see a lot of little bubbles start to form in that crease. What that means is that the starter has reached peak point. Okay, so it is not going to rise anymore past that point. That is the absolute best time to use it. Okay, so when you're getting used to your sourdough starter, you're gonna need to take some care, be watching it, but that's kind of the point, right? It's kind of your pet, it's kind of something you take care of and hopefully lovingly. So that's when you're going to want to use it. It helped me when I first started doing this to keep a log, because the more that you are refreshing it, the more it is going to be more consistent in its rise and in its timing. So the log can be very, very simple. It's just I fed this amount of starter on this date at this time, and my kitchen was warm or my kitchen was cool, because temperature does play a factor. And then kind of track that over time, and you'll be able to see and reasonably predict when your starter is going to be ready.